passing word from you makes my day worthwhile. It takes all that. Welcome, Year 7. Welcome to a video in which I actually star, not just doing the talking. I'm hoping that today's video, it's not going to quite have the polish of whatever it is you watch on YouTube, but then again, I don't have thousands and thousands of pounds to spend on editing, so it's going to be a bit homemade. We'll see how it goes. So what I'm going to explain to you a bit more about today is imperialism, and in particular colonialism. What does that mean in this context? Well, when we're reading this poem, obviously, like all things, we should think about what context was it written in? What did the people believe at that time? So this is going to be a poem. It's called White Man's Burden. It's about this idea that actually, if you travel halfway around the world and take someone's country off them and rule it as if it was your own country, actually that can be a really difficult thing to do. And maybe you should think about that as a sort of difficult task that you undertake, not because it's for your own benefit to make loads of money or to get those resources, it's actually for someone else's benefit. It's really difficult, but you do it because it's the right thing to do. So that brings me on to these weird cartoons behind me. This guy, Uncle Sam, the sort of traditional depiction of the United States of America. This guy, Britain, I think they call him Joe Bull, like a bulldog. And on their back, they have various assorted people from the colonies that both countries eventually ran. Now, it's pretty famous that Britain had an empire, but the American empire was sort of more dotted around the world because they got going a bit later. And for a while, whilst Britain was holding countries all around the world, the Americans almost thought that it was maybe not the thing to do. So this poem is written at a time when Kipling was trying to convince the Americans, and you'll remember from our last video that he lived in America, he's trying to convince the Americans that they should have their own empire, that it's the right thing to do. Well, they're the kind of people that aren't going to take too much persuading because they already have this theory called manifest destiny, where they think that they are the ones bringing the word of the Lord. They're bringing Christianity and their civilized ways to America. Here's them docking in the East. In this very famous painting, they're traveling across America figuratively. They're bringing with them their animals, they're going to farm, they're going to make the country better. They've also crucially got this book here, the Bible, and all of these colours suggest that they're bringing light to the darkness. Look at these savage red Indians. No, get out of here. We're going to make it much better, was their belief. They thought that wherever they went, they made things better. And this is going to be something that he's tapping into, Kipling. He's trying to bring out the American belief that they're making things better through bringing the Bible, through bringing their modern civilization. They can actually improve the world wherever they go. So that brings us on to this place called the Philippines, which is from this very blurry picture, just off the coast of Southeast Asia. Now, the Americans, they had a problem because they just fought a war with the Spanish. And then Kipling was on the side of the people who said, hey, you just won the Philippines off the Spanish, who'd been there for hundreds of years themselves. You just won that. And now you should rule it as your own. Don't give it back to the Filipinos. Don't let the people who are from that area run it. No, you should run it yourselves. So he had to persuade these people that that should be what they do. And, well, if you know much about the Philippines, he won the argument. Why do they play so much basketball there? Well, it's because they were ruled by the Americans for a very long time. And like all colonizing powers, they left behind their culture. They left behind things they cared about, which is partly why the Americans have such a close tie with the Filipinos. But it wasn't so straightforward. At the time, there were lots of people arguing that this was a bad thing to do. Someone even got, they stood up in the American government and they said, reading this poem, they said that this poem is proof that we shouldn't do this, that we should just give it to the Filipinos and get on with running our own country. He said, the Filipino people, they are not suited to our institutions. He means things like government, voting, and their sort of way of running a country. They are not ready for liberty as we understand it. They do not want it. Why are we bent on forcing upon them a civilization not suited to them, and which only means, in their view, degradation and a loss of self-respect, which is worse than the loss of life itself? So he's saying, guys, we really shouldn't bother doing this. We should just stay here in America, let them have their country, because they just hate it when we force them to live in the way that we expect them to live. They hate it, and they view it as a bad outcome. They aren't grateful. Well, in steps Rudyard Kipling with the counter-narrative. He says that they're bringing civilization to these savages. Now, in the poem, I want you to look out for the language that he uses to describe the people. He's trying to draw this image of a group of people, a bit like the boys from Lord of the Flies, who are savage. They don't know any better. They are from this place called the Philippines. They don't have factories like we have factories. They don't have religion like we have religion. They don't believe in culture in the way that we do. They don't have theatres. They don't have sort of pianos and concerts, all these Western things. His argument is that if we give them all of these things, if we give them our system of culture that goes back thousands of years, if we give them our systems of democracy, of government, well, they'll be better off in the long run. His argument is that we can change the way they live their lives, but this isn't an easy process. This poem is all about how it's very hard to do this. You don't just get off the boat, find a group of people who say, teach us your ways. No. You get off the boat and you find a group of people who are very suspicious of you, who want you gone. They want their country back. They haven't asked for you to be there. And so it's a really difficult process. He's trying to tell the people exactly what it really takes to pull off a successful empire. And he's coming at it from the position of someone who's already been a part of a successful empire. As a person who grew up in India and who spent a lot of time there, he thinks he knows what it takes, and he's ready to advise the Americans. But he's saying it's not going to be a cakewalk. You won't find it really straightforward. There will be challenges along the way. So he drops some little hints into the poem about how it's going to be difficult, but it's worth it, because you leave behind, when you leave, some good things that are for the people, for their benefit. Chief among these, religion. Savages, as you'll remember from Lord of the Flies, they don't have Christianity. They worship things like the beast. They worship these things that are wrong. They don't get it. Poor people is what they believed. They need to be taught the right way. So we will take them religion. We will take from them their natural resources, and that's a fair enough exchange. We take all of their money and their resources, make them work for us, and they get religion in exchange, maybe some of our sports, and we also teach them about how our government works. Well, people at the time, they weren't really in love with this message. Kipling found some people who loved the poem and thought it was fantastic. They thought it completely explained all the things they did. But unfortunately, there were plenty of others for Kipling who weren't that impressed. Mark Twain, who you might remember from last lesson, he wrote a poem taking the mick out of this poem. It was satirizing his poem. He said it was to the man in darkness. He thought that it was a silly idea, and he brought up all sorts of examples of people who'd been brutally assaulted by the British Empire, saying, I'm not sure they do want you there. I'm not sure it is worth it. So this is such an important poem to be looking at today, because people still think in this way. And you might think, oh, well, that was hundreds of years ago. Surely people are much more enlightened. Well, there's still a thing that we know as the white savior complex. That's the idea that a white person can go to another country where they may be poorer, maybe they don't have as many resources, and through their own brilliance, they will be able to help them improve their life. Well, it's not always that straightforward. Often the people don't want you there. Often the people actually want you to leave and go home so that they can help raise themselves out of poverty. They don't need your help, thank you. send us some money if you really must. Perhaps that would be a helpful acknowledgement of the things that you took from us. Because a lot of these people, like where this gentleman is showing up, are from countries that were once upon a time colonized, and of course during that time they lost a lot of things. So this poem sits in the midst of that. Kipling is writing it to try and explain why, even though it's really difficult, it is worth it in the long run. You probably won't get that much thanks from the people that you're ruling over, but they won't realise that actually they're getting a really good deal out of it. Right, good luck with that. I'll just briefly explain the questions in a second.
The white man's burden. Take up the white man's burden. Send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need. To wait in heavy harness on fluttered folk and wild. Your new caught sullen peoples, half devil and half child. Take up the white man's burden, in patience to abide, to veil the threat of terror and check the show of pride, by open speech and simple, and 100th times made plain, to seek another's profit and work another's gain. Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace. Fill full the mouth of famine, and bid the sickness cease. And when your goal is nearest, the end for others sought, watch sloth and heathen folly bring all your hopes to naught. Take up the white man's burden, no tawdry rule of kings, but toil of serf and sweeper, the tale of common things. The ports ye shall not enter, the roads ye shall not tread. Go make them with your living, and mark them with your dead. Take up the white man's burden, and reap his old reward, the blame of those ye better, the hate of those ye guard, the cry of hosts ye humour, slowly towards the light. Why brought us ye from bondage, our loved Egyptian night? Take up the white man's burden, ye dare not stoop to less, nor call too loud on freedom to cloak your weariness, but all ye cry or whisper, by all ye leave or do, the silent sullen peoples shall weigh your gods and you. Take up the white man's burden, have done with childish days, the lightly proffered laurel, the easy ungrudged praise. Comes now to search your manhood through all the thankless years, cold-edged with dear-bought wisdom, the judgment of your peers. Okay, so I've taken a few sections from the poem, which I'd love you to answer some questions about. I think what they give you is they give you a few examples from the poem where he is using some of this negative racializing language, and then a few examples from the poem where he is trying to give the reader a warning about the costs that you might incur when going into another country. So you're going to answer some questions about what he believes about what a heavy harness and how this shows that he thinks it's not all plain sailing. There's definitely a cost to it, and that this isn't something that you do for yourself, you do it for other people. Think of what you would put in a harness. And he's essentially saying that you, the colonizer, you will be in a harness serving these people. To seek another's profit and work another's gain. Again, we've got this repetition of a word here that seems really key. He's trying to hammer home this message. For this one, you're finishing off a paragraph. So I've written you a point. I've given you some evidence as well. I want you to explain, why does he say this? What do you think the aim is he's trying to get across this? So just finish off this point here, and your writing should be in bold. Okay, so next one. In this paradox, how does Kipling justify that savage wars are acceptable? A paradox is where two contradictory or opposite things are said to be true. And so you might recognise this language from 1984 if you've ever read it. How can you have a savage war that is of peace? That seems opposite. And then for the extension, can you think of any modern day examples of these savage wars of peace where people have justified fighting a sort of brutal war that will actually bring peace to an area, they say? And then for this sentence, I've given you the point, I've given you the explanation. Now I want you to choose which evidence you would use and to put it into an embedded sentence. So that's just a chance for you to practice all the parts of a paragraph. I've given you the point and the end, the explanation part of the sentence, and you can put in bold the middle part of the sentence. Middle part of the paragraph, sorry. And then at the end, by all ye leave or do, the silent sullen peoples shall weigh your gods and you. Even if there is no thanks to be had straight away, as in the people aren't going to be smiling and being necessarily grateful that you're there, but he's saying that they will eventually weigh up what you've done to the area after you've gone. Okay, so let me just do that and then... Right, good luck. Remember, pause the video, go back to any of my explanations of the questions if you get stuck. Please ask me lots of questions.